When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject, John Boy. User, First Eyes 1A. Hosted, March 2nd, 1996.
My freshman year of high school was the worst year of my life up to that point. First, I blew out my right knee on the football field. It was a no-contact injury, too, so it wasn't like I had a great story. I just twisted it wrong and went down like a marionette with its strings cut. I was never going to be a pro football player. I wasn't that big or that good, but when you're good at something in high school, you're pretty sure it's going to be that way forever. If you've ever torn cartilage, you know that blinding flash of pain, and if you don't, I envy you. It was the first indication I ever had that my body wasn't always going to do what I wanted it to do, and I vividly remember crying face down into the grass. To this day, the smell of a freshly cut lawn will sometimes still make me tear up a little bit. I was out of the season and in a leg brace for months. I told myself it couldn't possibly get any worse. That's when the phone call came about my grandfather. My grandpa's name was Norm, and he always wanted us to call him that. For whatever reason, he wasn't a grandpa guy. He was loving and treated us like gold when he saw us, but he just didn't like the name for whatever reason. Norm was big on routine, so when he called on a different day than usual, I knew something was up even before Mom hung up the phone. When she at last turned toward me and Dad, her face crumpled before she could even get a word out. She'd lost her mother, my grandmother, before I was born, but having to confront losing Norm brought it all back, I think. When she was able, she explained that the diagnosis was terminal, but the doctors had given Norm up to 5 years, so he insisted we not disrupt our lives by making a trip down there. It felt weird not to go, but my folks eventually agreed we'd wait until Christmas to visit Boca like we'd planned. I remember asking him about it on one of our monthly phone calls. "Norm, why don't you want to see us?" I asked. "You're dying, right? Shouldn't we come see you?" Hey, he said softly. "I never said I don't want to see you, John Boy. I always want to see you, but as far as dying goes, I always had a head start on you guys, so this isn't news. Besides, do you really want to try flying with that knee of yours like it is? Nah, you gotta take care of your knees, kid. They're not always gonna work the way you want them to." That made me laugh. This one doesn't work the way I want it to now. He laughed too, and we moved on to a different subject. The last thing he said before we hung up was, "See you at Christmas. I love you, John Boy." We never spoke again. The doctor gave him 5 years before the cancer ate all the way through him, but that didn't account for the knock-on effects it was having on his other organs. Norm had a heart attack 2 weeks after that phone call, and I ended up flying with a busted knee anyways. I still couldn't flex it to any great degree, so I had a huge brace keeping it straight. It wasn't a great time. Being in Norm's house without him there was weird. His clothes were in all the closets. Everything smelled like his cologne, like he had just stepped out for an ice cream a second ago. I hated every minute of it. He used to collect old 132nd die-cast cars and model plane kits and would even let me play with them when I was little, even though most of them were collectibles from the 30s. He used to say that when he was a kid, he'd had all his toys taken away from him, so he decided he'd never take a toy away from anybody else. He was proud of those cars and had a special display case made for them. It didn't seem right that the cars were still there, polished and shiny, but he'd never get to see them again. It was too much for me, and I split after maybe half an hour while Mom and Uncle Ernie were debating what to do with everything. Norm's place was in a gated community next to the ocean, and there was a private stretch of beach leading up to a little park with some benches. I crutched my way over and eased myself down to the bench. It was a beautiful day, and the waves looked like glass castles moving ashore, but nothing could distract me from the knowledge I would never see him again. I tried not to cry, but couldn't stop it. It was like a dam breaking, and I sobbed so hard it shook my whole body. My knee hurt like hell, but I didn't care. All I wanted to do was cry until I died. It was the smell of his cologne that stopped me. I thought Mom or Uncle Ernie had heard me and come out of the house, so I tried to wipe my face clean. That's when I felt his hands on my shoulders. Not Uncle Ernie, not Dad, but Norm. He'd always had big hands, and when I was a kid, he would stand behind me, one on each of my shoulders. It used to feel like a giant was watching over me and made me feel safe. I heard his voice in my ear. "It's okay, John boy, let it out. This will pass. Nothing is forever, except for the good stuff. That never goes away, I promise. We'll see each other again." Then it was all gone. The voice, the hands, the cologne, all like it had never been there. All that was left was the sound of the sea, endlessly moving toward the shore.
Subject: The Boy at the Reservoir. User: Pick8Furl. Posted June 13th, 1996.
Back in the early 80s was when I had my one and only encounter with what you might call ghosts. In fact, it's such a traditional ghost story that you might not believe me, but I swear this really happened. Everyone in Echo Park knows about the Pioneer Market. It's kind of like the heart of the neighborhood, along with Pioneer Chicken, Liquor, the Chevron, Finers, and all those other places. What a lot of people don't remember is that before the market was rebuilt in the mid-'80s, the parking lot used to be in the back, hidden from view, and boy, was it a place to get up to trouble. Understand that the Pioneer is run by good people who didn't condone any of the shenanigans back there, but there's only so much anyone can do. At night, my buddies and I would cruise Echo Park for kicks, sometimes looking for girls, but mostly just being out in the world and feeling that sense of freedom you only get when you're a kid. When we wanted to score a little weed or play some dice or just feel like tough guys, we knew exactly where to go. Down Sunset to the Pioneer. This one night, it had to be in the summer because it was hotter than a blast furnace, we hopped the fence at the Silver Lake Reservoir so we could cool off. We was me and my friend Johnny B. Not to be confused with his cousin Johnny F., who was grounded that night and couldn't sneak out. The water was exactly what we'd hoped it would be, cool and refreshing and surprisingly empty considering the heat. Johnny and I were in there maybe an hour before we decided to dry off and then head over toward the Pioneer to see if there was any action. In heat like that, you don't need much time to air dry, and before long, we were hopping the fence again. I don't remember what we were talking about on the way back to the car, but it must have been pretty dirty because when I saw a little boy, maybe 10 or 11, standing next to the fender, I felt a hot flush of embarrassment and shut up. Johnny kept talking a second or two longer till he saw what I was looking at, then did the same. When I was that kid's age, teenagers scared the hell out of me, so I was surprised he didn't react to our being there with fear. He just looked at us and said hi. I could tell Johnny was surprised too because there were a couple of beats of silence until he said hi back, giving a lame little wave. I frowned and asked the kid what he was doing out by himself so late, and the answer he gave sounded so old for his age. I'll never forget it. Sometimes I like to come back and visit the lake. It's nice, don't you think? I didn't quite know how to answer that, so I just agreed. There was an awkward silence, awkward for Johnny and I at least, as the kid didn't seem to care one whit. It didn't feel right to just move him along, so I asked if he visited the lake often, and again, his response has stuck in my head ever since. I don't know. I don't think so. Again, I couldn't think of any way to respond to that, but I suddenly felt a desperate need to get away from there. I told the kid we were headed to the Pioneer and asked if he wanted a lift home. He shrugged, his little shoulders rising and falling underneath his thin white shirt. Sure, I don't think I've done that before. Johnny gave me a look that said, "What are you doing? This kid is seriously weird," but I couldn't explain it then and can't now. Something told me not to ignore this boy or leave him out there. We piled into my Ford, though now that I think back, I can't remember if I opened the door for him or if he did it himself. It's an odd thing to forget, but my brain has just smoothed over that part of the memory. Once we were in the enclosed space of the car, the unusual silence became even more noticeable. Before pulling out, I checked my rearview mirror and saw the kid sitting in the middle of the bench. In addition to the white shirt, he was wearing what looked like long shorts that went down past his knees. Back on the road, I felt a little more in my element, so I asked the kid what his name was. An entire block rolled past before he replied, long enough I didn't think he would. We were just about back on Sunset when I heard him pipe up. "Ben." "Okay, Ben," I said, making the turn. "Where are we taking you?" As I said that, some greaser asshole cut me off and I had to jerk the wheel to keep from crashing into him. I laid on the horn and Johnny shouted a few choice words out the window before the greaser peeled off, weaving in and out of traffic until he disappeared from view. I shook my head and bitched to Johnny about the guy for a minute before remembering Ben in the back seat. "Hey, sorry, Ben, I didn't..." As the words came out of my mouth, I glanced in the rear view to check on him, and he was just gone. I don't remember what I said next, but it was the kind of thing my mother wouldn't have approved of. That's for sure. I was a hair away from slamming on the brakes, which would have gone very badly for us, so I'm glad I didn't. Instead, I told Johnny to check the back seat in case he'd hit his head when we swerved or something. Big John literally climbed into the back seat and found absolutely nothing. There was no sign Ben had ever been there. We spent half an hour driving up and down that stretch of Sunset looking for the boy. It wasn't likely he'd gotten thrown from the car, but at that point we were grasping at straws. After all, whoever actually believes they've seen a ghost? We never found any trace of Ben, nor have I ever seen him again in the years since, even though I make a point of going up to the Silver Lake Reservoir at least once a year. He said that he likes to sometimes come back and visit, so I've always wondered if the lake is somehow significant to him. It's possible he drowned there, though I don't know how you'd verify something like that. Wherever he is, I hope Ben is coming back to the reservoir, not because he has to or because something tragic happened there, but because he likes to take a break from his next life to be reminded of this one.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.